People's Forum 2015, and I think first of all everybody who's here and who's on their way deserves a clap on the back, because the level of commitment that is freely given by everybody involved in the forum is a feature of it. Niall will be co-chairing this with me. The speakers, as I said, are welcome. McGrath are to be thanked for making their place available, because the forum used to be held in Inver Community Centre, but can be no longer because the management structure of it having been taken over, it then went and accepted the Shell shilling. So any place that has accepted the Shell shilling is not an acceptable place, and we can no longer go in there. It's important to commemorate and to remember, but it's also important to cast a critical eye perhaps on what is being commemorated, and that is particularly the case in whatever is coming up to us next year, 2016, 100 years after 1916. For me, the two essential aspects, I think, are quite simple. First of all, I would ask, in 2016, what are we commemorating? What have we done with the effort of those 100 years ago who struggled, fought and died to preserve or to fight for a nation state and its people? And are we really going to kick off 2016 by whatever puppet government is in place finally handing over the pathway to plunder to Royal Dutch Shell? And 100 years on from 2016, in 2116, what are people going to have to commemorate then? We'll all be long gone, and what will people who lived in this area, or in this time, era, have done that will be worth commemorating or being commemorable? At each forum, we always remember the Ogoni 9, because through Majella McCarron we made links with the Ogoni in 2001, which, when one thinks of it now, was a mere 6 years after the judicial execution of the Ogoni 9 at the behest of Shell. Every year also at the forum we remember Niall Harnett, and we also remember all those who stood at the gates of Shell who are no longer with us. And I think this year also Cullen, who had written a lot and who knew an awful lot on the whole subject of our natural resources. May all of them rest in peace. And now Majella will speak for a time at this stage, then she will speak some more at another time, but she will speak now 20 years after that judicial hanging.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
And I'm very glad to be here. I haven't been here for over 2.5 years because I was ill last year. So I'm very pleased to be back again and to see all the faces. However, you know, when I was coming last night with Nisha and Margaretta, I suppose the one thing that struck me was the silence. And it had an impact on me, really, because the silence is very full. You know, it's not an empty silence. It's full of what was and what will be. And I realised that the people whom I was coming to are the families and the people of the area. And they're all in their houses, if you like, and a great welcome awaits us in their houses. And that is just beautiful to come back to, because since that time I've been living in an estate and I don't know anybody, and I've no house to go to. Our community is in Rostrevor and County Down. So I now know the difference between community with open doors and communities where we don't look at each other at all. The other thing I missed too was the young people won't be here. There's no camp. They're gone too, and I had a lot of thinking about where are they, where is this one, where is that one, what has happened in their lives and that kind of thing. So there was a kind of an emptiness, and I would say even more, probably for many people a lot of trauma left after the whole thing. But then maybe local people are accustomed to dealing with trauma. I think a tight community does its own trauma business, I think, because there's so many uncertainties. So I'm very glad to be back here. In Galway last week I commented how pleased I was that the Ogoni anthem had got on to the new CD, and how difficult it must have been to find that, because it's possibly the only piece that's left on this side of the ocean now, because the Ogoni have gone quiet but are suffering still. But there will be a quietness there too. So that was great for me to hear that, and I played it during the week. I think I played every piece of the tape during the week. And there is a website still called ogoninews.com. And, you know, this is really a sharing. I'm not doing very formal. It's a conversation, really. I'm just sharing with you what's been going on, because having to tell you has made me look back at them and see what's happening there, because there's a very big distance between us now. So I've told you that there is a reasonably good website strictly on Ogoni issues. And on that website, and just for you to know the contribution that has been made, they regularly put up photographs that have been taken here. The first one is a way back a long time ago, Dance the Guns to Silence. You know, it was both in Irish and English, and there were leaves over the edge of it. It was like a postcard. So that's often on that Ogoni website. The white crosses are often on the Ogoni website. They probably don't know where they've come from, but they love them, otherwise they would never have put them on their website. And quite extraordinary, the crosses that were brought maybe in the last year or two to the Shell headquarters in Dublin with the black masks over the top of the cross, the 9 of them, that appears now and again. And I'm sure there are 2 or 3 others, and I just, you know, it just is wonderful, because it shows what happens between communities and how far ideas can travel, and maybe not knowing much about the origins or not. And Pope Paul wrote a big, not Pope Paul, he was the present man, what? Francis. Dreadful. It's because it's a book, so I kind of associate books with Pope Paul's and feelings with Pope Francis. But whoever wrote it for him, number 32 in his 232, he had a wonderful description of exactly what happened here. and I use this in other talks. He says, a new piece of social fabric is created, because they had asked me in an interview about why was it that we were so close, and all this presumption all the time that we were close friends. We knew each other for 2 years, and during most of that 2 years he was in detention. So I only met the man every now and again, and his letters were the medium for sharing about the campaign. But I got my answer, and I gave my answer. It was published in the tablet, how I mentioned that the bond that's created around an issue is very supernatural, very superhuman, and very special. And it was, in the material is called A New Piece of Social Fabric Emerges. And I just thought that was beautiful, you know, that there were people now working together who got to know each other, experienced each other. 1916 leaders would have been very like that too. If you read their life stories, there were such disparate characters, but at some moment in history they came together and probably didn't like each other, a lot of them, very much, and suddenly they were able to merge into this. So I think that has been the experience for Shell to see anyway, and the people up here, and those of us who have come in from outside. Now, when I decided, because I knew it was the 20th anniversary, and that's very extraordinary, because very hard to accept within yourself that 20 years have passed. You know, it's a third of a lifetime, really. And that's what it has gone to, and what has kept one thinking all the time. And you wonder, was there much else in life besides these things? Ogoni and Eris. But like a whole 20 years. I would have come here maybe 15 years ago or sometime around that time, and 22 years ago got into the Ogoni issue. And you ask yourself, so a lot of the time I don't know what to be thinking at the anniversary. So this time, as I explained somewhere else, I went out to Glasnevin Cemetery, where I'd never been before, even though I'd worked in Dublin a long time. And I was very fortunate in that there was a talk being given, it was a Sunday morning, by the Ivy Group, the Ivy Society. It would seem that when Parnell was being carried to his grave in Glasnevin, the people who were following him, thousands, didn't know what to carry, what to have. So they picked the ivy off the walls as they went along, and they put them there in their lapels. So 128 years ago it was since that had happened, on the Sunday I was there. So I said, you know, I'm worried about 20 years, but in 128 years we might be still remembering it one way or another. So that was very moving. And then there was something else that taught me a lot about leadership, because unfortunately, being a northerner and then going to Nigeria so early in my life, I never really had any access to Irish history at all. You know, so I'm only picking it up in the years since I came back, and not in a concentrated way, which I think is great because it's more interesting maybe when it's coming to me like this. But the man who was giving the lecture, Cavan, I think is his name, J.M. something, he's a scholar of Parnell, and he pointed out just the starkness of one big stone and nothing else on it except the word Parnell. Just a big stone. Nothing more evidently needed to be said. And for me it was a great description, say, of a leader. You don't really need much more. So leader for me is a very special person, and a person that only comes now and again. And it's rather tragic because he's short-lived, or she's short-lived. Even the longest life will still be short-lived in terms of history. And I got this image of a fire that suddenly springs up, and I think of the bonfires coming. Is the 15th of June, yeah, bonfires over here. And 23rd. Is it whatever? Yes, history again. But how a fire shows up the mess that's around. You know, you don't actually see it with such great clarity unless a fire, a very big fire, suddenly goes up and you see everything that's there, the mess, I call it, around the fire. But as I said, that is the task of the fire, or the firer. Because dies down, Sarawiwa died down, and we have a phrase in the north, bad cess to you. Bad cess to him. He went off and left us haunting. You know, we left us in the mess and with the mess. So it's wonderful having a leader. How to value one's leader and how to deal with the hard work of the leader afterwards is a very difficult thing. So I decided anyway to go to the lecture and to listen. And this man finished with a poem, and the poem for me was my answer to the search for my reflection for Sarawiwa's death this time round. So I'm going to read the poem, and there's a bit in the middle that I wouldn't have been aware again with my paucity of history, is that they were looking for somewhere to hang paintings in Dublin at that time. And there was no gallery, and there was nowhere that wanted them. People weren't a bit interested in art. So that's in the middle of the poem, and that touched me a lot. Shade, interestingly, was a term that came to me easily, because in Nigeria, ghosts would often be referred to as shades. So I was amazed at how I was able to ode to a shade. You know, it's ode to a ghost. And if you don't know shade equals ghost, you're completely lost in the poem, you know. And he's talking about him coming back into Dublin to have a look around. He has been dead and in the grave for a certain length of time. And the poet is talking to him. If you have revisited the town, thin shade, whether to look upon your monument, it's there in O'Connell Street, I wonder if the builder has been paid. Or happier thought it, when the day is spent, to drink of that salt breath out of the sea, when grey gulls flit about instead of men, and the gaunt houses put on majesty. Let these content you, and be gone again, for they are at their old tricks yet. I think that's a wonderful line. For they are at their old tricks yet. A man of your passionate serving kind, who had brought in his full hands what they had only known, had given, what had they only known, would have given their children's children loftier thoughts, sweeter emotion working in their veins, like gentle blood, has been driven from the place, and insult heaped upon him for his plans, for his pains, and his open-handedness disgrace your enemy. An old foul mouth had set the pack upon him. That was the man who wanted to hang the art. And I think this is my favourite piece. Go, unquiet wanderer, and gather the Glasnevin coverlet about your head till the dust stops your ear. The time for you to taste of that salt breath and listen at the corners has not come. You had enough of sorrow before death. Away, away, you are safer in the tomb. And I just thought of Sarawiwa in my case, you know, that indeed he's safer in the tomb. And would you wish on him, the awful trouble still continues in his land. So I thought it was a marvellous poem for a leader, for this fire that shines very brightly, shows us all the mess we're in, and then he disappears, because he has done his bit, and unfortunately we were left with the other bit. And I'm sure during the day maybe that's what we'll be talking about, how do you manage the other bit. Now, it was interesting, the little bits that come up. MOSUP, the Movement for the Survival of the Ogoni People, had its meeting on the 20th, and God help them, it would be quite a broken and fractured movement at this stage. But they invited one of the lawyers who had been a defence lawyer. And the beauty of this is that he isn't from the ethnic tribe of Sarawiwa, But in my time in Nigeria, there were a group of lawyers and a group of journalists, and one cannot say enough about them. They were the people holding the light. They were able to overcome ethnic barriers. They were able to stand in front of the military. One of them lost his life in a petrol bomb. But only for them, they were the saviour of the soul of Nigeria during the military dictatorship. So there were journalists and they were lawyers in this case. So they asked one of these lawyers to come back and give the talk for the 20th anniversary to Mossop. And I just picked out what he said they suffered during the court case. It was when all efforts to demonstrate that the murder of the Ogoni Four was carried out by the state, that the defendants, that was Sarawiwa, the Ogoni Nine, well, there were 16 that time, and one of the splitters of Shell was to let half of them free and hang half of them. And you can imagine, like, the dissension that caused in communities if they took half people from one set of villages here and another half, let one lot live and hang the other lot. It was such a deliberate act. So these men were very brave. They said, get rid of the defence lawyers. This is all pre-planned and we're not going to win anything. So please, defence lawyers, leave us alone. We'll take what's coming. And this is one of the defence lawyers who spoke just 2 weeks ago. The defendants asked the legal defence to withdraw from the trial. Apart from preventing us from defending our clients as the situation did, Chief Awahimi, who's now dead, and I were physically assaulted in the premises of the tribunal. I was also detained at the dungeon of the State Security Service for 3 days for allegedly politicising the trial of the Mossop leaders. And then the second bit that I think I wasn't very aware of, he said the execution of the death sentence was carried out in utter violation of Section 8 of the Civil Disturbances Decree of 87, which provided that the record of proceedings of a military tribunal had to be transmitted to the ruling council, which was the confirming authority. And what happened there was Ken's son was in New Zealand pleading with Mandela to do something with the batch of the dictator to stop these hangings. And there was even a possibility that Mandela would be sent from the Commonwealth Conference to Nigeria to plead with Abacha, and Abacha did not want that, and he hanged them immediately. So the law was totally overturned there. So he didn't want Mandela to come. So the hangings had taken place, and I remember, because I was very involved at that time, even though I was in Ireland, but the time difference was a big issue in the hanging, because, you know, the sentence had been passed. It had so many hours to get to New Zealand, to where his eldest son was pleading, and then so many hours to come back, so that the hangings got lost in the time change, the time zone. So that was very moving as well. So there's just a few items from the memory of that time. Now I have to pay tribute here again, because it's wonderful. Maynooth University Library has taken everything that I had, many letters, poems, hats. The Mossop hat I had, Sarawiwa had given me his own Mossop hat. So that's proudly in the exhibition and in the archives and that. But the person who actually created that link with university was one of your young solidarity activists from here, John O'Shea, and he looked so much older now than he was at that time. And John used to be sitting up in the field up there, and we used to have a chat, because for some extraordinary happening, his aunt married one of our neighbours in Fermanagh, and she was buried in my mother's graveyard. So it was such an extraordinary experience. And John would be very quiet, and he plods along in his own way. And I said to him, when you go back to college, and he was doing his master's in sociology at the time, would you ever ask your staff, would you ever think of taking these letters? I really, because I thought I was going to die soon, so I said they'd be thrown into a bin and that would be the end of them. So John went back, it was July, there was nobody on seat, as we say in Nigeria, in sociology. So he had the presence of mind to go down to the main library. And they tell me there that there was only a stand-in person at the desk, but she had the presence of mind to go in and say, there's a strange fellow out here talking about a collection of letters. So from that day to this, I had a phone call in Mayo that evening, and that has been wonderful. And when we were there, we had some of you people here, and we had John O'Shea was there, which was wonderful. And we had an exhibition, and some of our nuns came up from Cork to have a private viewing of the archive before the main events took place, and the library gave them tea and sandwiches. The human bits of this are lovely, and I love the human bits of the story. But also, you know how people take on the mantle and they run another bit with it. Maynooth has taken this, the library has taken it up very seriously. And when they produced the letters in book form, which wearied me to think that's what they were going to do, but they did it. And then they saved the proceeds of that. And we have the first Ken Saro-Wiwa scholar. And he was presented to us 2 weeks ago in Maynooth, a very tall fellow who already has a master's in history, and he's doing his PhD in history. So he's the first Irish Ken Saro-Wiwa scholar. He's from Meath, is where he's from. And just, he had to send in all his papers. There were applicants for the scholarship. So just to read a little bit from his proposal. This project is important for understanding the relationship between government and corporation with respect to a crucial resource underpinning our world today. I think that's quite splendid. By looking at the genesis of this relationship, and he goes back to the end of the last century, it will help us to understand how and I love his words here, how a trickle of influence grew to be an overwhelming force in the formation of policy. This force would eventually lead to the creation of major corporations, for example Shell, with unparalleled financial backing to acquire the necessary agreements for further exploitation. So I just thought he has got a good grasp of where we're going. So we wish him the best in his bit. Now in Nigeria itself, just rather shocking for me, over my period of time when I was there, we were under a military dictatorship, Abacha, who hanged Saro-Wiwa. And then we had a very benign kind of a man called Yaradua. He was a civilian. And it was he who actually said to Shell, if the people won't allow you to work, you have outstayed your licence by 10 extra years, you better think about going. And they did. So he was very, he left it to the people to decide whether they wanted them or not. After that came, by a kind of death succession, a President, Goodluck Jonathan. Just to tell you about the names, you've kind of very strange names down along the Niger Delta, which isn't a bit unlike this place. Because the traders before colonisation came in, and they would have had middlemen and helpers and carriers and lifters, and many Nigerians took the names of the fellas whom they met when they were raiding the Delta coast. So you find very strange surnames like Goodluck. That's the man's name was Goodluck, and Jonathan. The two of those names would have been born out of the Niger Delta activity of trading. They're not names belonging to there. And then there is another benign ex-military man, Buhari, in at the moment. But over the last few weeks it came to my attention, because I don't work on this all the time, that in latter years they had a woman Minister of Petroleum. She was the first woman president of OPEC, so you can imagine how powerful she was. And she would have been from the south, like Jonathan, and a very serious scandal broke in that she probably has carried out one of the most corrupt exercises ever in the history of Nigeria. Unfortunately, the woman is in London dying of cancer. Nevertheless, she has been a shocking presence in the corruption, in oil corruption. And when I read back in her history, she started off as an executive director of Shell. So you can imagine what hope had Nigeria those last 60 years with that kind of thing. So that showed us why she was a petroleum minister in such a wealthy oil country as Nigeria, and why she made it into OPEC, which is the whole crowd of them together. So that was a big shock, but showed us the finger of Shell there again. Now, on a lighter note, what about the Sarawiwa family themselves? Well, there's a lovely item on Al Jazeera on the 10th. They interviewed Ken's wife, Maria. And Maria stayed in England, as many of you knew. She was separated from Ken. But she said to me, because I met her once, whatever about being my husband, he'll always be my leader. And it was lovely for me to write that in one of those letters, that this is what Maria said about you when I visited her and the children in Surrey on my visit from Nigeria, my final time. So she's back in Nigeria, and she's in the house that Ken lived in. So she's back home. And her daughter, No, who was our guest in Maynooth, has written a lovely book herself, Looking for Trans Wonderland. It's a book on Nigeria from her point of view, because she spent most of her time out of Nigeria in England. But it's a very funny book, because it tells you a lot about how her father brought up the children, and he was very tough. He made them come home from England every year and brought them to the village for 2 months and said, Granny, they're to carry the water and the firewood, and like he made them, because his idea was that he was educating his children as highly as he could in order that they would come back and give service to Nigeria. But she felt it awful being back there. And you know, lots of people meet me, and she's a very polished English accent because she'd been brought up in some of the best schools. But she is so Nigerian at heart that it was an absolute delight for me to meet her. She's in her late 30s now. You know, the accent is there, but that's all. The rest of her is totally from her people. So she's a writer, a travel writer, and she has a twin whom I know nothing about. Owns Wiwa, whom you had as a guest here for some time. He runs the Clinton Health Project in Nigeria, so that's what he's at, and we're in fairly contact. Now, Ken Jr. is interesting. He had to come back from London. It was his duty as his father's son to come back. And strangely enough, he's had to work in the government for 20 years. Why? Because his state, River State, where he comes from, said, you are to go up there and you are to watch for our good in that place. Now, he has never been able to do very much. So it's been a very hard life for him. He's had to leave his wife. It's like a rewind of the story, and his 2 sons in London most of the time, and commute back and front. Now, he wrote a book years ago, but he also has started, and you can find it on the web, the Ken Sarawiwa Foundation. But you know, it's quite empty too. And it illustrated for me what happens when the leader goes. What is the next step? And he wrote out, and this is 20 years on, he wrote out a letter to us, and he said, all you people who helped us over the years, can we renew contact with you? Can you come and try to tell us what we should do next? And you know, it's something worth thinking about, and maybe something that will come up here today in your discussion. What do we do next? The young man has been left with a huge legacy, huge expectations. What does he do next? because he's not his father and having the skills of the vision, even though he's a bright young man himself. But it just said to me what to do next. So from my little input today, I want maybe us to be thinking about that. What do you do next when the leader goes and the light fades? Now, just to talk about 2 NGOs, and I will be finished within a few minutes. One other thing, Platform, maybe some of you had worked the websites, platform.org is an arts group in London, and they've been very faithful to the Ogoni issue for maybe 15, 18 years. I'd be a small outfit, I would think. I don't know them personally. But they had a competition 10 years ago to mark the 10th anniversary. The competition was won by a London-based Nigerian metal sculpture artist. And she won it by building a bus. Now, a bus, in Nigeria we call it a mammy wagon. It would never be a bus like Corrib or McGrath. It's a lorry with seats in along the back, and the market women sit maybe 8 aside, and the chickens and everything sits in the middle, and away we go to market and away we come from market. And the drivers are very artistic, so you get pieces of the Bible, pieces of the Quran, sayings, curses, everything is painted on the mammy wagon. It is highly adorned. So she adorned her sculpture, you can pass it round actually, her sculpture with a saying from one of Ken's letters. He said, "I accuse the oil companies of genocide to the Ogoni people." And with great aplomb they said, "This is the 20th anniversary, we're going to send the lorry back, or for the first time, to Mayo in the Niger Delta." So they got a big container and put it on a big ship last June, July, and it started its journey by sea, because it's a huge thing, to Nigeria. Now what did the customs do? Impound it, because of its political content. I accuse the oil companies. So this wonderful, rough-looking sculpture is sitting in a customs shed in Lagos at this present time. It was not allowed out for the 20th anniversary. So there you are still, the military mindset, the political mindset is still there. What the future of that will be, I don't know. Now the second NGO that has done something good this year, because every year something adds up, and the story continues with a new group of people. Amnesty International, the British organisation, has always done a good job for Ogoni, even here in Ireland 20 years ago. They were one of our strong supporters. And many of them, the most they can do is a piece of research or something, but those reports and those pieces of research are just wonderful. Because in 2010, Cheryl decided it might be more sensible to get a big research report on the pollution in the Niger Delta, in the Ogoni part of the Niger Delta, which remember is about the size of Louth. And last night I was saying, you know, it must be about the size of here as well. So you'd have a geographical context. And, you know, as an activist all over the years, and I spoke many places and spoke for Ogoni and for the pollution, but deep in my heart I wasn't able to get beyond a certain point. And I said, please God, they're telling the truth, because, you know, activists are actually allowed to add on a bit to everything they're doing, because otherwise nobody paid them any attention whatsoever. But I would keep saying, I don't want to be ever found out in a lie, or that I have been pushing something that I didn't understand or anything. So in that 2010, UNEP, which is extraordinary, the United Nations Environmental Programme, undertook to coordinate a huge pollution research project in Ogoni. paid for by Shell. But whatever stroke of luck, we got enough truth out of us to keep us going for the next 100 years. Because evidently the people who were brought in to do it were truly good scientific people, and they weren't going to compromise their own profession. It's a magnificent report, and the situation was 10 times worse than we ever thought. It was 10 times worse. So much so that now it's 4 years afterwards. The clean-up is pathetic, and that is just what I want to tell you. The clean-up is pathetic. Because local skilled contractors, unskilled contractors, go for the job. And just to make it very simple, in reading the Amnesty report, because what Amnesty did, very good method, they selected 4 places that have been highly contaminated when UNEP visited, were certified as cleaned up by Shell and the Nigerian state. And then they brought in their own specialists to 4 of these sites and found them still very contaminated and certified as being cleaned up. So I want you to get that right, because God only knows, it might come your own path someday, that the clean-up had taken place not properly, and the state agency, which has no capacity in this area, not its fault, it doesn't have the skills for all of this, asked Shell to help them to certify the clean-ups, or worked along with Shell. So there are places in Ogoni being certified as pollution-free that are not so at all. So the lie continues. So again I have a question, when does the lie end? Like, or what will cause the lie to end? And I think in my whole life now, that's my big what. Do it with the people and make sure they do it, because there's nobody else to watch them except yourselves. So he's exercising a kind of leadership role. I think there's not a hope in hell that the Niger Delta can ever be cleaned up. It's sodden in oil, that's just sodden. And one of the tests is, if a little area, and you know it only need be a little area where a pipe just drops out a few drops, if the sheen continues on the water for 30 days, it's not clean yet. If you wait until 60 days and the sheen is gone, it's clean. That's the local way of looking at it. It would be the scientific way as well. So when is that ever going to happen? Because as soon as one leak is repaired, there's another leak. Now, you will know or maybe remember that in '93, Shell was expelled from Ogoni land. But what many of us didn't realise was that there were pipes running from other parts of the Niger Delta through Ogoni land and out beyond it. And it's those pipes that are leaking, not the pipes in the landscape of Ogoni. They're bearing the brunt of it. But it's often hard for people to conceive that it's like your own. You know that there's a pipe out there now, right? I mean, it's there. It's running from that end up to that end, but none of us see it. And it would be the same. The Niger Delta would be free of active exploration of oil since 1993. But the pipes running from other parts of the Delta to other parts of the Delta and to the terminals, they're leaking the whole way through Ogoni. So it's just, I find myself, I'll try to remember and I'll just end with that. When I was talking in Maynooth, a kind of a poem almost came out of my head. I said, kind of turn off the tap, stop the leak, do the clean, and forget about oil. Allow the earth to flourish again and to feed the people. Remove it, clean the stain, let the earth flourish again. Now, what brings about that situation? So I'm afraid I'm more full of questions than answers, but that is maybe the work of today. How do you deal with these huge issues that have such impact on humanity? Thank you.
Thanks to Majella, and I would just like to immediately introduce Margaretta D'Arcy, who needs no introduction to many. We're now...
Do you want me to just come in as I'm going to be doing my friend's colours? Do they want to come?
No. Margaretta is going to do extracts from the Non-stop Connolly Show, which was written by herself and her late husband, John Arden.
You could have it. Now it's very interesting that in Maynooth they have all the archives of Sister Majella about Ken Durawiwa. And yet one of our great figures of 1916, James Connolly, his works have never been collected yet. There is no scholarship in any of the universities with all of James Connolly's works. And not only that, but when we actually look at the dates of all these works available, so we have Labour in Irish History, is the last time it was published was 1983. We have Socialism Made Easy, the last date of that was about 1971. We have this in the 60s. We have all of these, his lost writings. The Songs of Freedom have been published recently, 1913. He also was a playwright, and not only was he a playwright, this is an interesting volume of 4 Irish rebel plays. 3 of the leaders were executed, but their plays live on. So that John and I, is that we wrote a very long play about James Connolly, which was first put on at Liberty Hall for 26.5 hours. Now, in April, we will be having readings of this play in the Connolly Bookshop in Dublin, which will be at lunchtime, and it will be an hour each, and it will run for 14 days. So let's hope something. So I was very struck by the fact is that James Connolly is a writer, and yet how many of us know about his works? He was foremost a socialist organizer, a propaganda, and an activist. Without his thoughts, can we really carry on? I mean, Majella is talking about change. We need change, but what kind of change do we need? Unless we understand how our society is organized, will we be on the right path for change? Now, 1916, the only one of those who knew what the plan was James Connolly, because he was a socialist. The others were not socialists, they were nationalists. As a socialist, when he died, what happened is his books were suppressed and really only came out in the commemoration of 1966. So that one thing of change that we can take place is to make ourselves familiar with James Connolly's work and his passion for change. So that I have made a very short version of this passion for change, and for you to understand the mind and imagination of James Connolly. So here we go. Would everyone like to sit down? Because in a kind of way, it's kind of more like storytelling time. So if everyone can just sit down and kind of relax. Okay, Kathleen, are you ready? Story time, the story of James Connolly. Thank you. In 1868, in a dark and smoky hole, in Edinburgh town, a child was born who was both pale and small. His mother came from Monaghan and his father from God knows where, but that they both were Irish folk, their poverty did declare. Their patches and their poverty and the famine they had fled from their youngest child's first day on earth lived deep inside his head. His knees were bent in bandy and he waddled as he walked. He was unhandy and cantankerous, and he stammered as he talked. He talked as little as he could. His tongue was made of wood. He was a cautious, quiet child. He never had much good food, but his eyes were as bright and glittering as a bullet that flies by night. James Connolly, that careful child, he was born in the dark and he looked out for the light. For all your small size, Jim, you're 11 years old and we cannot afford to keep you at school any longer. We must go out into the town and find work for you today. Come on, son, here's a printing office. We will see what they have for you. The work was hard, the pay was poor. The wind blew in at the workshop door and scattered the papers on the floor, and always I must pick them up, and always I must pick them up and carry the type and mix the ink and clean the press and scrub the sink. I thought that men wrote words for men to print, for other men to read, and thereby cause men to think of what the world has been and what it is and what it yet will be. I was informed this was not for me. Put that bloody book down and get on with your work. The inspector comes. That's a very wee lad you have working at that table. What's his age? Send him home to his mother. The Irish baker and the lawn maker is in need of a smart wee boy. You idle wee bugger, the fire is down, you'll ruin the cakes. I wasn't asleep. Then what the hell were you doing? Writing is it? I was after copying a wee writing with a bit of a burnt stick. C is round, and O is round, and N is straight. I cannot keep my eyelids open. I can think of nothing but that great weight. I fall asleep upon the hard stone floor and dream a dream that I have dreamed before. I am in prison by the fire. And in the fire, there's no way I can get out of here except to let the flames run over all, burning the floor, the window and the wall, and I am free.